All right, well, today's talk is, of course, about the science of fun, psychology, and game design, because the two disciplines are actually pretty linked. There's a lot of stuff they have in common, even though they speak different languages, and we're all concerned about motivation, how we engage players, how we get them to do certain things, how we make people have fun, right? Well, a little about myself first. Yes, I'm the chair of the Serious Games SIG. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a Fulbright Scholar in psychology. I do a number of different things. I'm actually from the United States. The Fulbright Scholarships are an international exchange program between the U.S. State Department and a number of different foreign ministries around the world. I'm over here for a year looking at online communities and video games, things about online toxicity, social identity, how people perceive toxicity and aggression, things like that. It's interesting stuff so far, working with Riot, Valve, such. And yes, my email, I can be reached through an email address of serious@iga.org. So, yeah. So how many of you have heard of the IGDA? A few of you? Okay. We're a large professional organization to help game developers learn, network, get access to more opportunities. We have a discount on new memberships this year, so just plugging that a little bit. This can include free access to online education, discounts for various books, conferences, things like that. And part of what the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, allows is involvement on a local level. We have both chapters, which you may know of here in Brisbane, like the Brigda IGDA Brisbane, as well as Gold Coast. We have them in many cities around the world, around 90 or so. And we also have SIGs, the special interest groups, one of which I chair. These are volunteer-driven communities about a number of different topics, some of the biggest of which are, say, game design, programming, developer credit, making sure everyone gets credit for what they do. Accessibility, which is a pretty big one these days because of all the people with disabilities. Game education, how we educate people about making games, like what goes in the curriculums. Serious games, which I head up. Tools, community management, and much, much more. So if there's any topic you're really passionate about, you really think needs to be addressed in the community, this might be something this might be a way you can get involved. The IGDA is always looking for passionate people to head up things like this. One thing in particular you might be interested in, if you are a student. How many of you are students, out of curiosity? All right. The IGDA Scholars Program. This is for people who are currently students studying game development or dealing with anything with games, really. Whether at the undergrad level, the graduate level, the doctoral level, or such. And they allow you to get free conference passes and a lot of other benefits to help you get a jump start into the industry. We've had things like GDC, GDC Europe, GamesCon, and stuff as part of this program. We've passed most of the deadlines for most of the things this year, but there is one last one coming up, the Tokyo Game Show and CDEC Scholarship, which you are welcome to apply for, though the deadline is tomorrow. So a bit of a tight timeline there. Don't worry, application's not too long, but it's a great opportunity. A lot of the time, it does come with a travel stipend, so those of us who are stuck here on this part of the world can get paid like $1,500 or so to go travel to a conference, which offsets your plane tickets and such at least. Useful program. We also do put on monthly webinars about different topics. Every Wednesday, the last one was just this Wednesday, US time, Thursday, Brisbane time. Time zones are kind of a messy thing. We just ran one on contemporary issues in game design, and we have a few upcoming webinars on best practices, worlds of thought and play, and we have the possibility of others. So if you're interested in having one of your talks or have a topic you want to talk about before the international community of game developers and you want that to be put up on the IGDA site, contact me or contact the address or your local chapter chair. We're always looking for passionate people who are looking to get involved. Right, so let's get down to my actual talk then. What makes games fun? Or when you think of fun in a game, what do you normally think about? Anyone? All right. Well, normally we think about two dimensions. We think about enjoyment, which is what a lot of people think. Like, do I like doing this? Is this game something I would recommend to people, right? But then there's also engagement, the willingness to have yourself to have your actions and emotions and thoughts directed by an activity to achieve objectives. How invested are you in the activity? How drawn in are you by it? Measured by time, attention, or the word we like to use is immersion. They're related, but they're not identical. In fact, some studies have shown that if you just enjoy a game, that might not reflect how well you recommend it to people in like 12 months or so, versus if you have both enjoyment and engagement together, you are more likely to continue to be a loyal player, a loyal customer of the franchise and such. So companies are really interested in this sort of thing. So we talk about motivation a little bit. We have two kinds in terms of engagement. Intrinsic motivation, seek out new things, new challenges, analyze your capacity, observe and gain knowledge, which is, if you think about it, really close to what you see, sorry. Which, if you think about it, is really close to what you see with the Federation in Star Trek. They're explore strange new worlds, seek out new life, new civilization. It's behavior driven by play, curiosity, desire for mastery, because it feels good. It's something that can be long-lasting and self-sustaining. And of course, if you have intrinsic or internal motivations, you have external motivations, more characterized by the Ferengi in Star Trek, where you're always looking for a profit, the reward. What's in it for me? You're looking for the performance of an outcome in order to gain desired of an activity in order to gain an outcome, like money, fame, experience, or just really nice loot in one of those RPGs. So if you, for example, if you were going to do a raid boss and you were going to go in with your friends and and you're all coming together, you enjoy spending time together, killing it, that would be intrinsic motivation because you're interested in seeing how well you could do, what you're capable of. If you're just doing it for farming it over and over for the epic loot drop, that's extrinsic motivation.
Where do you put the aspect of you doing it with your mates? It's a social thing.
That has to do with the relatedness aspect of intrinsic motivation, which I'm going to be covering in a little more detail. So, yeah. Sweet. So you've also probably heard a little bit about Bartels' taxonomy of players and how achievers are looking for things like concrete measures of success, levels, equipment, things they can show people. Explorers who are interested in just looking for knowledge. Pretty clear like external, internal right there. You have the socializers and the killers who are both looking for ways to relate to other people, one by making friends, one by interacting, one creating friendships, another one by dominating other people and defeating them. So a lot of the most successful games do cater to this category. League of Legends, for example, where you have to both work with your team and against the other teams. So sometimes against your own team when things are not going well. So, intrinsic motivation, when the experience is its own reward. This is drawn from something we call the self-determination theory of intrinsic motivation, which divides motivation that comes from within into three different domains. Competence, the feeling that the psychological need to know that you are able to be on top of what you do, that you can handle your life, essentially, that you have power, mastery. Autonomy, the ability to make choices about what you do, the feeling that you're not constrained, not forced into a certain path, not being railroaded in life. And relatedness, that you have connections with other people, that you deal with them and your relations with them are meaningful to some extent. And this is actually something we use in game design, though with different language. A lot of different language. We apply this through the framework called PENS, the Player Experience of Need Satisfaction, which is a framework that was researched by the people who came up with self-determination theory and who coincidentally showed that all those studies about about violent video games inducing violence were pretty much bunk. That was really there was really competence impairment or frustration with games that got people to be more aggressive, or the fact that games made people more competitive, and competitiveness was rated as aggressive. as we already know happens. So bad methodology in research happens a lot. Unfortunately, it's sensationalism, not good. Anyway, yeah, competence, filling out what you're doing. We talk about these domains a little bit. You may look at this chart and say, hey, this looks kind of like the flow chart, and it kind of is. Flow more or less falls into the competence aspect there. Autonomy is a little bit different, but it's the difference between, my choices are completely irrelevant here. They don't have any meaning. And I don't know what to pick because there's too much meaning in my choices. Relatedness, I depend too much on other people, and I don't have any significant relations to other people. You have to pretty much be in the zone for all three to be completely engaged in some of these games. But yes, studies also show that need satisfaction predictive of long-term player retention satisfaction than mere enjoyment. You may enjoy something at the moment, but how well will you remember it a year later, 2 years later? Will you buy their next title? That's what game developers are interested in. That's why a lot of them do hire psychologists. Valve does, Riot does, lots of others do. So competence, or you want to be a master. You want to feel effective at what you do. You want to have power over the environment, to be able to dominate, to control what comes at you. You want to have power too. You want to have the power to respond, to respond to the events coming at you, to be empowered to accomplish, achieve, solve puzzles, deal with things in the world. You don't want to be the super squishy level 1 character forever. You want to feel like you have an appropriate level of challenge, so that it's not like you're just coasting through the game and everything's easy, you just tap it and it dies. At the same time, you don't want to just walk into an area and you die instantly. So you got to balance it. You got to make sure that when you're coming into an area that you balance the difficulty and your capability, which again reminds you of flow quite a bit, right? Because that's that perfect balance there. But in games, you can't just have something in that state all the time, where everyone's at that perfect balance of ability. You have to make sure that there's some areas where things are easier for them as well, so they have that feeling of progression, that I have become stronger than what I used to be. This is one thing RPGs do pretty well, especially MMOs, things with levels where you've gotten stronger, you've progressed through the game, and then you can come back and think, oh, hey, this guy who used to beat me up all the time, oh, no, I can just one-shot him now. So yeah, that's that feeling, progression, achievement, whether it's explicit or not, whether you actually have points, levels, other mechanisms to show that you have these sorts of achievements, or it's just something that you sense, something that you gain because you have gotten good at what you do. Flow, of course, is flow. The engagement, competence factors, you need to feel that you are gaining skills. You need to be able to beat challenges. You need to feel some degree of recognition, get progress, achievements, opportunities. You have all these together, that leads to you being able to feel competent, which is one of the 3 components of intrinsic motivation of engagement. So all this is just one piece of the pie, even though it's a whole pie for itself. Autonomy, meaningful choices. Remember that, well, we have to remember that in games, perfect freedom is impossible because games have systems. Without the systems that are the basis for the game, without the rules, without the stuff, you won't have a game. You're just going to be this avatar, if you're an avatar at all, probably like a dot in the middle of a white space, being like, okay, I can go anywhere, but there's no purpose to this at all. So every game is a balance between autonomy and system, which means that when you want people to have freedom and autonomy, you have to give them freedom with respect to the system the player operates in. They have to have choices, meaningful choices, within the game itself to be able to impact the world of the game. Whether it's through the very obvious basis of, say, BioWare's dialogue wheel, where you can choose what your response is in terms of what to say or what to do, which was one of the big things that's been iterated on and added to over the years, so that now they actually say, oh, hey, this is the aggressive option, as opposed to before when you had no indication of, like, wait, what's going on here? I don't know what the tone is. Hey, it says, hey, the text says this, but they said something entirely different. What's going on? Which is annoying in RPGs. Aside from the easy example of RPGs, though, we also have things like combat games, or sure, you have one objective, like kill this guy, but you can choose what order am I going to kill this guy in, what steps do I take to prepare, what approach am I going to take, what weapons am I going to use, and all that affects the experience you have with it. For instance, in Assassin's Creed, you can go, if you really wanted to, you could go and fight your target one-on-one, or many against one, and you might actually win. But it's much easier if you go in and you can sneak in and just stab them in the back. Not always easy either, especially if you're in that one level within the mental hospital where all the patients keep bumping into you. Another example of how choices impact things, Halo. You have limited choice in what weapons you have. So what weapons you have at any given time in your inventory is important. What are the enemies you're going to face? How do the weapons you have impact your playstyle? How they impact what you can fight effectively, your strategy, and so forth. FTL or in other roguelikes, how do you approach the game? And of course, even platformers like Mario, it probably doesn't look like you have much of a choice there because your whole objective is to go from one end to the other, essentially. But you have a choice, like, where do you jump? Like, what are the consequences if you jump and you hit an enemy? It's not. You can choose what's the most effective path for you, when to use certain power-ups, when not to. If you choose the flower early in the game and you get the ability to shoot the fireballs, but then you use it up, it's like, hey, you don't have access to it anymore, so you got to prioritize that. That's part of autonomy as well. So basically, you want to have choices that matter. You want to be able to impact the world. And not just have something where you think you're going to impact the world and then you end up you don't. Like what happens with Mass Effect 3 with the whole three-color choice in the end. That kind of disappoints people just a little bit. Then they feel not engaged and they kind of get turned off your product. Relatedness, of course. Multiplayer, your relations with other people. Your intrinsic desire to connect with other people and identify with a group, to know that you're not alone, to know where you are in relationship to everyone else, because as humans we're innately social beings. This comes up mostly in multiplayer games, but there are aspects of it in single-player games as well. In multiplayer, you'll see things like the reason we have the Trinity in MMOs, because each person there has a reason for being there. The tank is there because they can take the damage, hold the aggro. The healer is there to keep everyone alive. The DPS is there because if you don't do enough damage, you're not killing the enemy and you're going to die eventually. You have the co-opetition mechanics in MOBAs. Co-opetition being a phase where you are both cooperating and competing with your group at the same time. Because in League of Legends, for example, it's individual experience and individual gold. Each person, based on the last hits they get and the things they kill, get different amounts of this stuff. And they have to get it up individually. So if you have someone who is really bad at the game, they could essentially be accused of feeding another team, making someone else on another team very powerful and ruining your experience. This is a little different for how it's run in, say, Heroes of the Storm, where it's team-based experience to encourage more teamwork. Because you can't have someone who just runs away and gets super, super powerful. Teamwork in first-person shooters, guilds in MMORPGs, trade systems, even giving someone gifts in Farmville. All these different things are examples of relatedness and have been ways they've engaged people. So, huge amounts of people through esports, streams, engagement with social media. You get journeys, interesting way of hooking you up with an anonymous person at the beginning of each map, and you can only help them. You have Farmville, which got famous because of its Facebook integration, and then later didn't do so well when Facebook decided that too much integration was actually hurting its business because people were complaining about too many gifts on their walls. But you also get relatedness in single-player games. You may recall what this scene refers to if you've ever played Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, you get something called player avatar identification, which is essentially like, do you identify with your character? Does your character look like you? Can it make the same choices you do? Can you agree with what it does? Does it represent what you want to be? I mean, that's why a lot of RPGs allow you to have these different choices, because they allow you to empathize with your character, to identify with your character. Because if they only gave you just one option and no choices for what to do, that's not the same kind of interactive engagement as you would expect from a game. You can get this sort of relatedness, not just from other people, but from simulations of people, from NPCs with good AIs or NPCs with good writing that make you feel like you matter to them. Not that just that your actions matter in the world, but that your actions matter to them personally, and that your character is significant to them, that there's a reason you're there. And so they want to foster, for engagement, you want to foster a sense of caring for the characters you play, the ones you're interacting with, so you're willing to invest time into helping them, into working with them, into playing the game. Right, so that was a basic overview of intrinsic motivation. Let's get down to extrinsic motivation, shall we? The stuff about the rewards. How many of you have heard of Skinner? Skinner? Yep, okay. Pretty famous guy in psychology. His basic philosophy, free will is an illusion, everything's deterministic. Your behavior is either respondent, which means it's in response to something, or operant, which means it's not in response to a current stimulus, but there's probably something else that it's actually responding to. And that complex behaviors can emerge from simple rule sets, a lot of the emergent behavior stuff we know today. And yeah, human behaviors are deterministic. That means that by manipulating the consequences of these behaviors, you can alter how likely they are to be repeated. Stimulus, instead of stimulus and response, his model adds reinforcer to it, which I'll cover in the next slide. If autonomy is the freedom to make meaningful choices, the consequences are the reinforcers or the punishers. For example, positive reinforcement, a consequence that strengthens an organism's future behavior because it's a positive benefit. Like Mario hits the question box. He gets coins or a bonus or something. So in the future, you're more likely to hit it again because you're like, hey, this is good. Negative reinforcement. If you do the behavior and it keeps something really bad from happening to you. Like if you learn not to stand in the demarcated area around the boss, you don't get hit by the AoE and you don't die. Of course, there's a lot of overlap between negative reinforcement and positive punishment sometimes, where, say, it encourages you to not perform a certain behavior because otherwise you will get a bad consequence. Like, for example, if you stand inside the area, you will get hit by the AoE and you will die. And negative punishment, of course, when the response produces the removal of a stimulus.
When you don't stand in the area, you don't get hit by the AoE.
Not exactly, but yeah. Okay. Let's say a negative punishment. Let's say you talk about let's say you're extremely toxic, you're extremely rude to someone, you've had a really bad day, you have played a match of League of Legends, and this person is totally ruining your match. And you just let loose on them. And all of a sudden you get reported, you have your privileges taken away from you. That's negative punishment, something being taken away from you, instead of something happening to you, you could say. Yes, there's a lot of overlap. Yes, these can all happen at once, or multiple can happen at a time. They're not mutually exclusive. And yes, you can use multiple reinforcers in what's called operant conditioning, which you may know from the Skinner's example with the mice pressing the lever for the food in different schedules. Got schedules of reinforcement there, because the thing is that with this sort of thing, with operant conditioning, people rarely are only reinforced or punished once for what they do. Usually there's a lot of little stimuli, a lot of little punishment, a lot of little reinforcers as you go along, especially when you're playing games. Like, for example, as you continue to go through an RPG and kill enemies, you continually get a little bit of EXP. But that's not necessarily EXP that you get just from being in the game. So it's not necessarily a continuous schedule, it's like that. Intermittent's a little different. A great example of how these two differ is between like EXP and drop items. EXP is something you'll get every time you kill a certain monster. Every time you kill a certain monster of the same level, it gives you the same amount of EXP at a consistent rate. Versus if you have a drop system, you don't get the same thing every time. It may be, if it's a rare item, it could be intermittent. You may have to kill a certain amount on average before you get an item. Or you have to kill a certain amount in general, which is the ratio or the interval. And this can be fixed or variable. So it could be just, after you kill this many, on average, you're going to get something. No, after you kill this many, you're going to get something. Or other reinforcers like, you've been online for this long. Maybe the game gives you a pop-up saying, maybe you should consider logging off. Like they do in Korea a lot because of the game addiction stuff. And then, of course, you get compound schedules where you combine combine several schedules to reinforce one behavior. For example, with the whole killing monsters, getting both EXP and possibly a drop item, that would be a concurrent schedule right there. Or if you're talking about a chain schedule where you kill multiple small things in order to get the items to assemble something big, that chained, encouraging several different types of behavior with one reinforcement, essentially. And the reason I have RNGs there is because, well, random number generators, and we found that intermittent schedules can actually produce a lot more engagement and attention than continuous schedules, though continuous schedules are good for maintaining that basic level. It's very interesting, actually, that when the mice were presented with the option of push the lever, get one pellet, push the lever, get one pellet, or push the lever, you have a chance of getting 10 pellets at once, or a chance of getting nothing. They tend to push the lever a lot more frequently for the push the lever and get 10 pellets at once or more, which is the same mechanic behind like loot boxes and things like that. So, a few other examples, your epic items, to know that you have a chance for getting it. Your reputation systems, to know that I just need to grind that last little bit for this quest, so I will do that because of that. Recruit a friend rewards. Achievements, that's another tangible way of showing that, hey, I not only have mastery, but hey, I got this sort of tangible reinforcer right there. Social reputation, login bonuses, high scores, levels, lockboxes, all these are extrinsic in nature, essentially. Even though there may be a little bit of relatedness as well for some of them because then you can show off what you have. These games have multiple things working together. The thing is, a lot of these motivations, these external motivations, can be internalized over time. So here's the entire continuum of how that works. You can go all the way from not being motivated at all and being like, I don't like this game, it's not fun, to external regulations like, okay, hey, this might not be a fun activity in a game, it might be a really tedious grind, but at least there's a really nice item at the end of this. If I keep doing this for like a month, I'm going to get this really epic sword or a dragon mount or something. Introjected regulation, like then there's internal rewards and punishment. You have self-control and ego involvement. So you have to feel, maybe I should do this because I've already invested enough of my time into this. I'd feel lazy if I didn't, because now you're starting to talk about it in terms of yourself and your person. Identified regulation, and then fully integrated regulation, where you're just like, I want this because I like having a dragon mount. I'm a dragon tamer in this game. And this is something that would really improve my character, or is it something that would really be nice? So the thing is that even these fully integrated ones have, even if they are mostly intrinsic at that point, have external aspects because they're still driven by that external item, that reward that you're going for. Make sense so far?
So it's all about the reasons that players give themselves in order to do something.
Yes, that's it pretty much. Intrinsic is the ideal one if you can go for it, because that can be the longest lasting. It usually costs you the least. It doesn't screw up your player economy as much. Extrinsic can be a good way to drive a short-term behavior, but there are dangers to using too much extrinsic, especially when you're trying to drive something that someone already finds fun. We call this the overjustification effect. It's part of what's known as cognitive dissonance. You're probably all familiar with the traditional cognitive dissonance example where people were assigned to do a really boring categorization task and were paid either like $1 or $20 for it. At the end of this experiment, they were asked to tell someone else that this game was fun, that what they were doing was fun and interesting. The people who got the $1 came to believe that it was actually fun and interesting, as reported in this post-activity survey. The people who got the $20 was like, no, I lied and said it was interesting. I just took it for the money. Because when there was no reward for that really tedious activity, they had to justify it to themselves and rationalize that there had been something there. So they thought that maybe it was actually fun. Maybe because I wasn't really paid for it. Maybe it was actually interesting. Overjustification, pretty much the inverse example of this, where you have something that people might already do normally, like running or doing a certain level in your game because they find it fun. But if you add a certain item, if you add a reward directly to it, an extra external reward, people may come to think, no, I'm not doing this for the fun anymore. I'm doing this for the item. And so you move from internal towards the external motivation, and that's not good because people can lose their enjoyment in the activity itself. We've observed this a lot with a lot of people who've tried things like gamification in the last few years. You know how big of a fad that's been to try to encourage people to do more exercise and such. Some studies have shown that for running, for example, you start to give people more rewards, more items, little money for however much they run every day. Even if they already enjoyed it in the beginning, eventually, once you run out of money to give them, or if you just stop giving them money, they're gonna be like, I don't like this activity anymore. I'm not getting paid for it. What you used to enjoy as your hobby becomes a job, essentially. And that's not something you want. So you gotta be careful with balancing that. But yeah, the caveat is that this effect only works when people know that reward is possible. And not like, oh hey, not like at the end where you've done something and then you get a surprise reward for doing it for like the first time or something. That can be something else. And that can be surprisingly effective, though in the age of the internet, people are going to know. So that's a bit of a problem there you have to think about when you're designing a game. And however, if you have things like non-contingent rewards, that can work as well. Like you play a certain amount of dungeons, just in general you get something, fine. It's not encouraging like you do one specific thing over and over and over, which then becomes a grind. Cognitive dissonance, I thought, interesting example from Mass Effect 2, since, yeah, cognitive dissonance, people are confronted with information that challenges what they believe in and they find it uncomfortable, so they try to deny it, avoid it. Good example right there. We go back to motivation and Bartels' taxonomy. You probably begin to see a little bit about how this all fits together now. How some of the achievement stuff is extrinsic, how a lot of the explorer stuff leans a little more intrinsic towards a desire for mastery. How the socializers and the killers are a little more on the relatedness side, though the killers are probably, the relatedness side was intrinsic, but it also involves some things from the extrinsic, like fame and reputation, or dominance of other people. And so let's look at the bigger picture a little bit, design beyond motivation, beyond things like flow, which pretty much every game designer has heard of at this point. Well, we have things like Saludo Genesis theory, which is how people adapt to and deal with challenges and stresses in their lives, which can also be applied to games. Aaron Antonovsky, the person who came up with Saludo Genesis, basically posited that people who respond well to stress, people who find new experiences enjoyable and rewarding instead of finding that they detract from them in periods of high stress, are people who have a strong sense of coherence, people who have a strong sense of comprehensibility. They can understand what's going on in the world around them. They can make sense of things. They can make sense of all the chaos. They have a sense of manageability. They have the resources to tackle what's in the world. They have a sense of meaning. That there's a reason for the stress they're going through. There's a reason for the trials and tribulations, the challenges. Which is all important because that's also a component of how we experience games. If you can't understand the rule set that's being worked on, you don't understand the mechanics of the world. If you feel that it's too hard, if you feel it's not that it's just too hard, but it doesn't make sense, or that sure it's too hard, you don't have the tools, you don't have the weapons to deal with something, say a horror game where you don't have anything, and monsters pop out all the time and keep killing you. It's like, why do I bother? Or the most important of these, meaning. If there's no meaning to you being there, if you don't think it's fun, if you don't think it's rewarding, if you don't find it interesting, you're not going to be there at all. If you don't have meaning, you're not going to seek something comprehensible or manageable. You're just going to stop the activity. I think a really good metaphor for the sense of coherence is the Triforce, actually. Because wisdom, power, and courage together can hold back like destruction or decoherence in this case. Whereas comprehensibility, ludonarrative consistency, rules that make sense in the world, like for characters to act in accordance with the way you've designed them, for the models to make sense. Decoherence, when all this stuff doesn't work out, when characters start to act against the archetypes and such you've already defined for them. People are like, wait, what's going on? I thought this person was like this, but they're not? But what? Like, I thought you wanted this, but then you went and became a terrorist and blew up the Chantry in Dragon Age 2s? Yeah, all sorts of different little things. Of identity, audience, and community as well. You get theories of identity and how they tie together with relatedness. This all becomes really important with multiplayer games, especially when you're dealing with the creation of huge online communities to try to support your games. Because these days, designers can't really create tutorials and stuff for all the different games they do, especially with people's limited attention span on things like mobile games, as I'm sure our colleague from Halfbrick knows quite well. So we have to rely on the communities to create, to contribute to this. The problem is when you start asking them to take on this role to essentially gain mastery through this sort of contribution, and then say the game is updated or changed in a way the community doesn't like, there can be a bit of a backlash to this because you are then challenging their sense of competence and mastery. You're challenging the roles they've taken upon themselves. So in addition to just the simple rules of engagement, you have to be aware of like who your audience is, what are the ways you're communicating with them, and is the way you're marketing your game versus the way you're interacting with the community creating some sort of role conflict that may prove destructive to you. This is not something you want to get into because once you get into that cycle, you're going to get a lot of hostility in the community, and that doesn't tend to work out so well in the long run. That stuff is a lot harder to fix than it is to prevent. But yeah, all that stuff with social identity theory, considering the messaging, being aware of your roles, and be aware of your audience. All this stuff I've talked about right now fits into the positive psychology model, which, if any of you are familiar with, is basically the branch of psychology that focuses on growth and experience and not illness. It talks about why experiences are engaging, talks about human emotions and strengths, why communities grow and thrive. It's the science of happiness, or as I call it, the science of fun. If you take a look at the Perma, which are the 5 pillars of well-being in positive psychology, positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, accomplishments, and as well as some of the things that are related to them, like self-determination theory, Saludo Genesis, learned optimism. You put those together, positive emotion, flow theory, strengths-based approach mindfulness, social identity theory, Maslow's hierarchy, Saludo Genesis, more motivation. You find out that there's a lot of game design stuff that works well with this, whether it's just the value of fun and the reward systems you put in to generate your positive emotions in terms of intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards, the immersion and flow you have for engagement, the sense of feedback and progression, the risk and reward, the feeling that you're actually making choices, the relationships you have, the social systems, the way you're allowed to communicate with other people, the way that the world is consistent, the way it builds empathy. It makes you care about other people in the world as well as other people seem to think that you matter. the fact that meaning, the fact that what you do, that there's a reason for what you do, for the time you invest, there's some kind of payoff, emotionally or otherwise, and yeah, that you're getting some kind of accomplishment. I mean, you probably have all heard of the Huizinga quote that's like, all play happens in this consecrated space, essentially, that happens in a space that's entirely set aside, the magic circle, for most of you who have learned game development or game design. But we're finding, especially as we talk about virtual worlds and such, which is kind of my specialty, is that the magic circle is porous. It's not just an absolute barrier that separates the outside from the inside. That what influences you on the inside can be taken out. What you bring in from the outside can influence what happens inside. So people are crossing in both directions, carrying their behavioral assumptions and attitudes with them. Games don't just stand alone. Games come in the context of all the other games that have come before them and the ones that players have played in the past. Like everything else, they're pretty much experiences to be enjoyed or hated or what have you, depending on how they're created and what a person is feeling at the moment. And game design's applied psychology with this, again, the same concepts, different language, with Newtonian engagement, for example, being one of the very common terms being thrown around the last couple years, that people are engaged until a certain point when external force acts on them. That essentially describes a situation where you have a high coherence, essentially, where you are continuing to find the situation enjoyable and engaging until you decohere, until something doesn't make sense anymore, and you start reevaluating, do I really want to be here? Do I really want to keep playing this game? For example, after you say, are playing a game, then you get lost and you can't find your way to the next mission of the quest giver, you're like, what's going on here? Or you die for the umpteenth time because something's too challenging. Or you're like, hey, wait a minute, I thought I was supposed to be the hero, and I was told to go, and yet I was revealed to have massacred all these innocent villagers? What's going on here? So, consistency. And so to make fun experiences, we have to understand what players want, what they hope for, what they fear, and how that may relate to what we want for them. Understand how games motivate and engage different audiences, how different genres engage different people groups, how the different mechanics and systems of each genre are predisposed towards other people, and what the role of hype is, how it shapes perceptions, how it shapes communities, and the context of the game. Because the game, again, doesn't just stand alone. The game happens within the context of everything that's been said about the game, everything people have heard about the game, and the games people have played in the past. They will judge it based on what they've seen. So, because in the end, if we understand all these things, if we understand how we can blend people's momentary enjoyment with long-term engagement, we can improve recruitment, retention, satisfaction, we can create better experiences for players, and I think better games, especially in the area where I'm working in, which is serious games, which has issues with that sometimes, to put it mildly. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much my talk. That just remember that in the end, no matter which world you're in, and no matter how everything changes, the heart remains. People remain people, no matter whether they're playing games, whether they're in real life, or what have you. Thanks. Any questions? Sure.
You just mentioned at the end that the area you work in, serious games, has trouble bringing that together. Could you expand on that a bit more?
Oh, sure. Quite a bit, actually. But yeah, this isn't quite a serious games talk. But yeah, the thing is, in serious games, there's a lot of beyond just the standard teams working together, the standard game development team working together. You have a team working for a client, which is generally some people who want a specific purpose. A lot of times academic, who have a clinical or educational purpose in mind. The problem is when this educational or clinical purpose overrides everything else in the game, where it says, no, it has to be built to this curriculum, it has to be done this certain way, because there's no other way we've known this to work. And so you can tell how well this might work with a game and when you're trying to get people to play it. That doesn't work so well. One of the things people tend to do in this sort, in educational games is the hated quiz-style games. It's like, oh, we've taught you how to do all these things. We've taught you all these things about mastery of this concept. Now let's test whether you've learned it with a multiple-choice quiz. Or have you write up a paragraph about it. I mean, let's take the example of Dark Souls, for example, and how well that would work if, say, after you learned how to beat the boss, you had to take a multiple-choice question test about how you beat each boss, what their mechanics were, and write about your experience. That would not be very fun, would it? Yeah, so a lot of these serious games don't track how people are doing very well. They haven't integrated all these measures to make sure people are enjoying the experience. They don't take into account intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and they don't understand they don't have a common language either. So game developers can get discounted by the clients and vice versa, because clients can think, oh, what you're doing is frivolous, it's not really important. But the problem is it's applied psychology, and if you don't take into account the psychology of the player, why are you making the game to begin with? Mm-hmm.
You gave in there the example of Final Fantasy VII with Aerith and all that.
Yeah. Relatedness?
Which
Yeah.
raises the question, how do they get away? Like, I end up feeling more engaged with a game with a pre-described character, like Cloud, than I do with a game with a more blank slate kind of idea.
Okay.
How does that work? Or am I just an odd one out?
No, you're not an odd one out. There's two different ways it can work. Like for the blank slate, it allows you to put yourself completely into the shoes of that character. It allows you to make your own choices, your own decisions and such. And as long as you have the freedom and opportunity to make those choices and make that matter, that's what that's really more about, the autonomy. Versus for those games, it's more about consistency. Is Cloud's narrative interesting? Can we see ourselves in Cloud's shoes a little bit? Can we see what's going on? Does this make sense to us? Do we have a connection with that? Like a lot of the Eastern games have a lot more emphasis on that deep story, and that's why they only present you with one story, essentially, as opposed to a lot more Western-style RPGs where are more about freedom of choice. Do all these things, you have absolute freedom. So different domains, more relatedness for more autonomy. Make sense?
Yep.
Huh? Yes, in the back.
Just expanding on that a little. When JRPGs and Western RPGs separated, a lot of JRPGs were founded in like comic books, like Dragon Quest and that, which followed the linear story.
Yes.
Whereas Western went more the D&D,
Yes.
make your own character, make your own adventures. With Final Fantasy though, a key element of the male characters is identity issue.
Yes.
Which could be something that resonates with you.
Yes.
Whereas the females are more about responsibility and sacrifice, like take Yuna, Aerith, etc.
Yes.
And there could be some themes that resonate with you.
Yeah. Those that's it as well. Those themes address something within you, and that storytelling, that world building helps draw you into it because it helps you to identify with it. Because it's not just what you want to be, but is the character like me in any way? Can I relate to them? Relatedness. You had a question.
Yeah, so would you say that like in designing good extrinsic motivation, that the key to it is the promise of good intrinsic motivation? So like I want this money so that I can buy a car and drive around really fast.
Yeah, I think that if you're offering some sort of extrinsic motivation, that it should tie back into the reason you're getting it. If you're getting something in a game that's extrinsic, right? If you're getting like a nice drop item, it should make you better at something in the game. Your extrinsic stuff should relate back to your feelings of mastery, competence, and stuff to fuel that cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so then would you say that extrinsic rewards would have that same trifecta as intrinsic rewards, where there could be something that's like, I want to unlock the ability to, have a friends list for relatedness, or I want this sword so that I can defeat more bosses.
Yeah. That's essentially what happens when you get fully integrated motivations. When your external motivations have a lot of internal components to them, essentially. Okay? Yeah? Yes?
Oh, I think you beat me, but...
You get this.
Well, just on that topic, where would you place the rewards, in-game rewards that have no gameplay benefit but are purely aesthetic? For example, in World of Warcraft.
Sure, like the cosmetic stuff you mean, the mounts? Or
Well, a mount, right? So
Yeah.
every flying mount can
Every
now
fly-
fly at the same
yes.
speed.
Mhm.
And one of the achievements
Mm-hmm.
is if you collect 100 or 150 mounts,
Sure.
your reward is a new mount.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last thing you need if you already have 150, and yet my nephew, for example, went out of his way to get 100 and whatever it was in order to get that extra one that no one else can have, and it had no capability to the game.
Well, there's no capability to the game, but there's also reputation to be considered too. If you're like one of the few people who has in the game, you can show it off. That's a relatedness thing. That's also an extrinsic motivation, fame thing. It's like, hey, I'm one of the few people in the game who has all of this. Look at my really cool mount.
Yeah.
It's the same.
It's still a dragon.
Yeah.
Just a different colour. The one you got collected 40 of them.
Yeah, but how many people have that one dragon, right?
Purple one is-
Exactly. Yeah.
So to put some more words on that, is exclusivity is a reward in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to touch on was
Yeah.
essentially when you're engaging with a player, you want to establish a trust relationship.
Yes.
Because if they don't trust you, then they're going to start questioning your game and the rules of it. And
Yes.
as soon as you lose that trust, you basically lose that player, right?
Yeah, pretty much. If you set up a lot of expectations for them and then you disappoint them, you may not only lose them for that game, but for an entire series. Like there are a lot of people who are burned after, say, Assassin's Creed Unity, after they originally promised, no, we're not going to release anything that's below 75 on Metacritic because we care about our series and we don't want to like make anything that would be terrible and drive people away.
Yeah, and I guess that
Yeah.
can go over the span of multiple games, even for
Yeah.
the entire publisher.
Mhm.
Because for the gamer, their relationship is with the publisher, not the specific game.
Correct. Because a lot of people don't know, say, the exact development staff behind a game versus they know like a publisher.
Yeah, which is why you get a lot of people that are longtime fans of Nintendo, for example, because their level of quality for things and the way that their games play.
It's consistently
very
high,
consistent.
yeah. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make one comment.
Yes.
The whole
Sure.
fixed narrative versus sandbox experience.
Sure.
I think you might, like, as an adult, you might find these fixed narratives compelling because they draw on a lot of the narrative techniques that have been developed many, many decades in books and
Mhm.
movies and
Yeah.
so on, kind of visual language and so on.
Sure.
But all that comes at the expense of player agency. You have to constrain
Right.
the player more and more to funnel them to the experiences that you want.
Right.
But there are other kinds of gamers, mostly young people, I imagine, that don't have that sort of mental baggage. Like I'm not surprised that something like Minecraft is so
Right.
popular with young people.
Because you can do anything, basically.
The sandbox
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
in itself. Like I remember when I was in my teens and playing something like Quake or Duke 3D or Doom, like playing the game on its own terms was the last thing on my mind. First thing I would reach for was cheats and
Yeah.
see where are the real limits to this. It was only a couple of years back that I played these games as they were meant to be played and took it seriously.
Yeah, a lot of people, especially when they're younger and you don't have a great deal of autonomy, yeah, you're going to reach for autonomy. Or especially if in your life, if you're not finding a great deal of relatedness, you're going to try to find a game that has more relatedness. Our research has found that if you don't have a need if you have a need that's not being met in real life, you're going to seek it somewhere, whether that's in a game world or somewhere else. So a lot of people can have very interesting friendships, very interesting communities online, or a lot of people who are finding themselves very constrained by systems like you might have in the East sometimes may find themselves playing a lot of MMOs where they can make themselves be anything. This is one of the reasons why you have a lot of addiction in Korea, for example, because you had a lot of depression, you had a lot of people constrained along those very fixed academic pathways, and people wanting to break out of that to meet their autonomy motive, essentially, which is another reason, this is why kids may be more interested in things like autonomy, because they don't have very much of it. But it's like, hey, a game where I can build anything I want, like Minecraft, it's like, great. It's all about what motive you're looking for.
So given the sort of three flow diagrams that you showed,
Yes.
for all the three major motivations,
Uh-huh.
could you perhaps say intentionally make something which is a lonely experience for somebody who feels like they have too much Like they have overdependence basically.
You probably could, yeah.
Like a chill out sort of game that allows them
To go out in
to
solitude,
find something
yeah.
within themselves that they
Yeah.
haven't been able to think about because they've been so bombarded by people.
Yeah, there are a lot of quiet art games that are like that, actually, and like meditative experiences.
Yeah, like I've heard a lot of people say like that are typically like in leadership roles within teams for their jobs. The games that they tend to turn to are ones where they don't have to make all those choices.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
they could just, keep tapping.
That fits
Yeah.
a lot into the concept of mindfulness, which you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why those adult colouring books are really popular right now, because
Yes.
it's an activity that they can do for themselves with no particular direction.
That's why something like Journey might be very popular too, because it's like a guided meditation in a sense.
Yeah.
Where it's like you can interact with someone else, but you don't need to. They're not responsible for you, you're not responsible for them, you're just fellow travelers. It's an interesting thought. Anything else? Yes?
I just find it interesting that there's some games that will give you like, I have a friend that like, because I'm a big Zelda fan, but my friend like played a Zelda game like the old Zelda Link to the Past.
Sure.
And she couldn't stand that game because, she didn't know where she needed to go because there was no direction.
Yep.
You just sort of had to figure it out by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd see like a YouTuber talking about Ocarina of Time, and how he didn't like it because it didn't give you all that freedom in the Link to the Past because, you pretty much, in Ocarina of Time, you knew where you were going.
Mhm.
Versus Link to the Past where you had heaps of freedom.
Right.
No direction, you sort of have to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was interesting. Like, there's some gamers that I guess prefer more direction versus
Yes.
some that want heaps of freedom to figure it out themselves.
Yes. People are not identical after all, so each person has different preferences, what they like and dislike, often depending on what they've encountered in life or various things they found that they enjoy.
It's convenient that you bring that up on this slide. The people that you're talking about would probably be either too far one way or too far the other on the autonomy one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's why no game works for everyone. There's no one universal game that's beloved by everyone in the world. I mean, I guarantee you can make the most beautiful game you've ever dreamt of, the game of your dreams, and you're still going to get haters. That's just a given. Because we don't all think the same. We don't all have the same needs. We haven't been exposed to the same things, the same concepts of what's good, what's bad. But these general rules and guidelines serve as a way to help introduce you to the player's psyche, help understand some of that. But in the end, it's really still audience specific. You still have to think about how this applies to the exact audience you're engaging with, the exact group of people, what they're looking for, what make them happy. It's all context dependent, basically, just like life is. Yes?
You talked at one point about the trade-off between just mere enjoyment doing something as a hobby and being paid as a job.
Oh, yeah.
The running example,
Mhm.
collecting rubbish was another example in the studies that we used.
Huh?
Is there any gaming experiences or any novel solutions to that crossover? Because there's a lot of games now, you've got the online enjoyment, the accumulation within the game, but then where they restricted perhaps an economy like I think World of Warcraft initially, people are doing and selling things on the black market, for motivations outside of the game.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that crossover. Is there a fulcrum there somewhere? Any novel solutions or directions people are taking?
I mean, I know that some games are looking at just full-out integration of various things. Like, if you talk about EVE Online, you could buy items of real money, and that can help fund subscriptions or be traded in-game. I know Diablo 3 experimented with that at one point, some others. Not entirely successfully with the whole hyperinflation that happened, but it depends. It'll depend on the game you're using and the community. So there's no one easy answer to that. Yes?
I just have one question. How does all this, back in the old days when there was like the old Sega and the Super Nintendo,
Uh-huh.
did all this stuff apply to that as well? Like, did they have different sort of guidelines back then? Back when the games was first being brought out? For, really basic platformers, I just was wondering if like it all applied back then as well.
I think that the general lessons and concepts are applicable, but we hadn't actually started thinking in terms of that until, say, the beginning of the 21st century, actually. Before that, a lot of game design was basically done empirically. You experimented, you found what worked, you found the rules, you found the best practices. And the thing is, these just happen to fit in with psychology theory because there hasn't been much crossover. In the 20th century, it became fashionable to get these siloed individual experiences, hyper-specializations, like I'm just a psychologist, I'm just a game designer, I'm this, I'm that, as opposed to what people used to be in, say, the Renaissance, were like, no, I'm a Renaissance man, I'm a Renaissance woman, I do everything, all this stuff crosses over. I think there's something lost when you don't actually enjoy these intersections and see how one thing informs another, because you're duplicating a lot of effort, there's so much that's not touched on, there's so much that one field could help with in exploring another field. I mean, that's why I do serious games, because I think gaming can be a great way to teach people, for people to learn, for people to be healed of various things. In the back, yes.
I just wanted to comment, like before the 90s and all these massively popular genres began to coalesce,
Yep.
2D platformers, racers,
Mm-hmm.
fighters.
Sure.
I think for a while there, any designer who stumbled upon a winning formula went on to write a book, basically
Yeah.
a dissertation on, okay, here's why I think this worked.
Mm-hmm.
Because there really was no academic
No, there
precedent
wasn't.
that would explain it to anybody, but people wanted to know.
Yeah, you're right. You're quite right. In fact, well, a lot of the time when academia first focus on games, they're like, hey, is this the reason for violence? And I'm like, God, really? Yeah.
That's a case of what people want to believe.
Yes. What they want to believe as opposed to what's really there. They want to blame something, not themselves. Yes?
Since you mentioned Final Fantasy VII, I assume you might be a fan. What are your thoughts on the remake? Because for me, I mean, 7 is a big part of my identity and myself.
Sure.
And I think putting into a new 3D action environment is just going to detract from the overall experience. Do you want to have any comments or thoughts on the whole thing?
Having replayed Final Fantasy VII again recently, I know that it doesn't age nearly as well as I would have liked to believe, and that a lot of it was a lot of my beliefs on how interactive it was at the time and how rich it was may have been a little tinged by glasses of nostalgia. So I'm interested in what Square Enix will be doing with it. I'm interested in seeing what they do. Yeah, what they do with the remake, how they handle it. I'm cautiously optimistic because I would like to believe they would treat the IP well, given how well it's done for them in the past.
Sort of.
Yes.
I have a question. I mean, I can't formulate it really
That's
well,
fine. That's
maybe.
fine.
So, as far as I understand, in the beginning of your presentation, you said that
Mhm.
the two basic milestones of fun,
Yes.
like enjoyment and engagement.
Yes, I've talked much about
But I
engagement.
understand that the majority of sort of presentation focuses more on engagement,
Yes.
not on the enjoyment. And there are, it's sort of interesting that sometimes you can. The way that right now people make games is sort of like they do have a core thing which is called game mechanics, and which is sort of more
Sure.
focused on the is it enjoyable or not, and then they sort of make a meta game around it,
Mhm.
which is sort of tends to improve engagement. And the question is, sometimes there are mechanics which are so good that they sort of don't really don't require a lot of engagement work. For example, match 3 game. It seems that games like that, they don't require a lot of meta game. And are there any studies about why this actually happens?
So you're talking about simple yet challenging mechanical games?
Yeah,
okay.
some simple things.
Like Flappy Bird or something that people enjoyed?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes, imagine the games, recent games, let's say, Clash of Clans, or
Okay, sure.
how do you call it? you probably wouldn't have a lot of like engagement framework. You wouldn't play.
You have some, it's a different sort of engagement. You're trying to get people to, for that, you're trying to get people to log in multiple times a day and to buy currency and other stuff, as opposed to sit for long hours and play for long hours. It's a different model based on the different platforms you're working with. A lot of that stuff is free to play. A lot of the stuff appeals to, hey, I have friends here that I want to play with, as opposed to, I want to be a supreme master of all this stuff.
Right, but I mean, the question is like more like what, maybe I missed the part of the
Sure.
presentation, like what makes the mechanics itself like fun? Why? Because like sometimes some mechanics, like as I said, like match 3, you can play it without any, just take the simple, 3, field with like with balls of different colors.
Usually,
it's still quite fun to just swap them around. It's something happens and you don't need to anything else.
Usually because that fulfills your competence motive quite well, and that gives you like a little punch of reward and feedback as you just do all of that really quickly and simply. It doesn't have to give you that much autonomy. It doesn't have to give you that much related if it fulfills that one motive really, really well. It's that simple. Yeah. Yes.
You spoke about just the gap in tutorials with games as they
Yes.
become more complex and out of date.
Yep.
Getting perhaps players to take on the games master role to teach other players and so on, and some of the difficulties that surrounded that. I think one you went to was just changing the game mechanisms too much too soon. Are there others that crop up, and what would be your general thoughts expanding on that?
In terms of things that have been offloaded to the community, things of changing roles, marketing and recruitment, a lot of these days is offloaded to the community. It's like, which is why you have the reason for all these recruit a friend bonuses and whatnot. But the thing is, if people recruit their friends to it, they talk about the game, and then it becomes an experience they don't like, they kind of feel really disappointed because, like, I put myself on the line and I recommended your game or experience, but then it's turned to trash. So, yeah. When developers and publishers work with communities, they have to be careful about how much they promise, how much they say, the roles they assign. Because if they're not, you get that whole role conflict that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, you said it was better dealt with in advance than it was throughout.
Mm-hmm.
In what way are you talking about? Some sort of constitutional approach or something?
Like, yeah, if you plan out beforehand, like what you want to engage your players with, the strategy you will have for engagement, how it will likely affect your players, maybe by talking with someone, as opposed to like, oh, hey, this would be cool to add. This would be cool to add too. Let's throw in this. Oh, hey, people are interested in this. Let's do a promotion with these people. If you don't think about how it affects everything from the beginning, just like if you don't think about the design of your game and how like adding a new mechanic or a new reward or something is going to change the balance of it, that can disrupt things quite a bit. We're coming to understand that things like communities, things like monetization, like all these things have to be designed just like the core mechanics of your game because it's all part of the player experience. The player experience is more than just their time sitting down playing your game. The player experience is everything related to your game, to the community. You get the picture, I think, right? Yeah. Yes?
I was just wondering, you know how you're talking about grinding and stuff can be boring?
It can be, yeah.
Yeah. But would the solution to that be like, do they use like social relatedness to sort of like be like a solution to it being boring? It kind of reminds me of like when I used to play RuneScape, and you'd be sitting at the tree, cutting the tree for ages, getting a whole bunch of logs to sell for money. But you'd be with all these other people and they're all just chatting while they're like doing it, just to waste the time.
That can help, yeah. If you make it like a social thing, yeah, that could definitely be a way to make it easier. As opposed to just, I'm alone, I'm cutting the wood, there's no one here. Why am I here? Why am I in the world?
What am I doing with my life?
Exactly. Yes.
Just a comment related to that, like, World of Warcraft never really sold me, but anytime I run into a fan in my social group, without fail, it's social. That's all they say. It's a social experience, not so much the game itself.
I mean, you have the guilds, you have all the different, you have the guilds, you have people playing together, you have people who meet and get married there, so, yeah. Yes?
I fell into the WoW addiction. Thankfully, I've broken it for ages. I think, going back to the whole RuneScape, you just love, like, even if you weren't actually doing anything, you had no goals, just running around the community and actually feeling as if you belonged.
Yes.
As you mentioned, something is probably saying that at the time I was missing in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be the reason.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I remember playing WoW, and I was grinding for reputation to get another drake, and that was boring as all hell.
Yeah.
But just talking to all the people in my chat just made it that much easier.
Well, well, you know what they say, misery loves company, right? It's like, you're not alone in this. You have other people with you who are going through the same thing. You belong to this group, so it helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
That all holds until we go back, before the online stuff where
Yeah.
grinding happened and you didn't have a social group.
Right, and there's other things. In that case, you're grinding because you want whatever comes at the end of the grind,
Yeah.
pretty much.
I just figured I'd throw that viewpoint in there as well, especially since we were talking about some JRPGs earlier.
But yeah, which is why some games later eliminated the random encounters.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people didn't like that so much. I mean, I think reasons why games like Pokemon do random encounters well is because each encounter is not just a chance to grind, but it's also an opportunity to encounter something new. There's that opportunity to see something that's unexpected, which is interesting. So opportunity and challenge.
To add on to Pokemon as well, it actually, the way it's laid out, not every single space you walk on is going to generate a random encounter.
Yes.
They zone it off.
You have safe spaces.
They,
Yeah.
like the grass. The grass is dangerous. It's the first lesson you learn. Don't go into tall grass unless you have a Pokemon. It's dangerous. So you can actually make the choice. If you don't want to go into many battles, you can just walk around.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like with shinies too. You can run into shiny Pokemon
Yeah.
after doing heaps of grinding.
Uh-huh.
Whereas the shiny, what annoys me about the shinies is their stats are pretty much the same as any normal Pokemon. You find them in battle sometimes, it'd just be like really shitty stats.
Oh, you'd prefer one like if it's shiny, it's like the most awesome one you can get, pretty much.
Like the perfect Pokemon.
Yes.
I think that comes also under the thing of discovery.
Yes.
And I think a lot of companies now put a paywall behind discovery.
Yeah.
And, like your loot boxes and all that and that kinds of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, back in the day, discovery was putting the disc in the PlayStation 1, playing Monster Rancher and seeing what monster was coming up.
Yeah.
Or Gran Turismo, just
Mhm.
never knew which skin like a car would have until you bought the car and paid the $75,000
Yeah.
or whatever. And I sort of think a lot of games have lost that element, which is a strong suit to Pokemon.
Yeah. I think it depends what genre of game you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at the free-to-play games, which rely on like loot boxes, then yeah, certainly they're monetizing discovery. They're monetizing that chance of something great in the box. But I think that other games, especially indie games, a number of them still do a good job of that because that's what you get every time you play like a good indie game. It's like, oh, hey, this is really cool. You get that feeling of, hey, these are new mechanics. This is a different way to look at this storyline. This is an interesting way to look at characters that you might not see in a lot of the extant franchises today. And partially, I think the reason for that is because people don't want to be too different because there's too much risk involved with it when you're a big corporation spending millions and millions of dollars. But yeah, comment or question?
Just wanted to repeat a comment I heard Yahtzee say
Yeah.
when he was talking about newly announced consoles, and he said, remember a time when video game consoles essentially sold themselves?
Yeah.
You didn't need all these marketing things like that. And they sold themselves because they looked and played like nothing you had before, and
Yeah.
everybody wanted them. But nowadays, large-scale productions, they steer in the exact opposite direction. Don't challenge the player to it. I think
Yeah.
it's going to really hobble the industry eventually.
I think that's
Also, it's not as powerful as PCs now.
yeah.
You can buy a PC for not quite the same price.
I'm a PC gamer.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it used to be the consoles had the cream of the crop
Yep.
of the graphics capabilities. When I think it was the PS2, when it came out, the Pentium 3 was the most powerful processor, and the PS2 had 3 times as much power.
Yeah. I think part of what the issue is in terms of things becoming easier as well, as people are saying, a little bit of an over-reliance on flow theory in a way. people would think, oh, maybe it's too difficult, maybe people are not getting engaged by this during playtesting, maybe the reason it's too tough. Like, as opposed to, not that it's too tough, but maybe it's inconsistent with how they see themselves or the play styles they want to adopt or such. And because they're not thinking about the sense of coherence, that's negatively affecting the play style and not getting that sort of Newtonian engagement they want. Yes?
It kind of reminds me of how Nintendo does. The good thing Nintendo does, it does good things and bad things. The good thing, it's very, it's always trying new things, which is awesome. But the other thing is sometimes in their games they do a lot of hand holding. Like, I mean, like it's okay in like Ocarina of Time because you get the option not to go into like the statues to get help. You can just ignore it. But in Super Mario, it's like, oh, you died this many times. Here, we'll give you this invincible like Tanuki feather, and you can just go through the whole thing easily. And sometimes you just accidentally get into it, and you're like, oh no.
Which is interesting because Nintendo in the past used to have this reputation of being super, super hard. So yeah.
Just started doing hand holding now.
Yeah, trying to go cater for a younger audience that expects a little more of that too. And that's the problem. So, yep. Oh, you first, then you. Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yes, you.
Okay. Just to add to those past couple of points, I think it's a general sense of user entitlement that causes a few problems. Like when you're presenting a choice before the user, if they encounter a reward of some sort, some kind of consequence that they necessarily don't like, they're very unhappy. Likewise, if they feel like they've invested time or some kind of in-game currency, they get very unhappy if it's just necessarily something they don't like, not necessarily something they didn't get. And so it makes it harder to make something immersive, and you're forced to make a game more on rails, necessarily, so that everyone's getting a fair experience.
It's hard to say.
You have to kind of advertise what you're going to get in advance. Although Hearthstone kind of goes a bit against that with random rewards for giving when you buy a booster pack.
Yeah, that's coming from the trading card genre, the physical trading card genre.
So people are used to that,
It's the case with mobile games that became free or incredibly cheap. Now, not many people will buy a game for $5.99 on their mobile device when we used to pay $100 a game. And now $5.99 is too much.
I think free-to-play has devalued a lot of games these days, so because there was that whole race to the bottom early on. So people were like, hey, I can make this free, I can make this free, I will make it free because otherwise no one's going to play the game at all. And I think that's a pity.
The Star Wars, the Old Republic, there are arguments about what constituted a good game or bad game in that, but it was the same subscription model as World of Warcraft, which is still subscription-based, and yet no one bought it. And once they made it free to play, they increased revenue by $7 million.
Well, I think part of the reason for that is because they target different markets. And the thing is, originally when they were building the Old Republic, they wanted to go for the hardcore demographic that was playing games like World of Warcraft. You got a problem there that those players are playing another game called World of Warcraft.
Although it was predicted as the World of Warcraft killer.
How many? May I ask how many games have tried to be the WoW killer and have failed? So.
Ironically enough, it seems WoW is the WoW killer.
Every game dies in time. That's the thing.
I heard LoL was beating it in terms of numbers.
No, online, I don't know about number of sales, but online general revenue, World of Warcraft is still $1 billion a year.
But in terms of people...
In terms of people, MOBAs get more, yes. But yeah. Yes, you've been waiting.
Sorry to go back for a while, but with the whole marketing and stuff, because I do marketing.
Sure.
No console generation that's been, no console from each generation has been the most powerful, has ever won it.
Yeah.
It's always come down to the games and marketing.
Yep.
And even like when you're a kid, everyone's heard of blast processing. So.
And the power of marketing was just at E3 a couple weeks ago, so yeah. Yep.
I have a question with like immersion, like say, you know how like some games are bringing out virtual reality now?
Yes.
The Wii's got the Wii remote, and then there's also just the normal, the old school controls.
Yes.
Like which one, like what would your opinion be with like virtual reality and motion controls versus like the old classic controls where you're just pushing buttons.
In terms of what? In terms of which one's more immersive? Or?
Yeah. What would you think people would be leaning towards more?
The thing is, immersion. Yes. The thing is, immersion versus what people like are not necessarily the same thing. I mean, yes, if you had a VR experience that was like full motion control and everything, that could be a super immersive experience. But the problem is that may not be what people want. You get people who have motion sickness from that VR. You get people who are uncomfortable with that sort of thing. Like, for example, would a game like Halo or one of the other first-person shooters be as good or be as interesting to people if it was a virtual reality game?
Hell yes.
Maybe. Maybe. I mean, some people in some of the Grand Theft Auto 5 testing that they found that some people are actually more uncomfortable because it's not like it's your character shooting. It's like, no, now I'm shooting. People's like, wait, what? So it's like, this is too real here. There's no separation anymore. So sometimes it depends on the game. It depends on the player. It really. So you don't have like one hard and fast rule for what people will like. It really depends what you've designed, the experience you're trying to have them convey, how you want them to play is. Because VR in that enclosed experience is not great for, say, necessarily a social experience where you're sitting next to someone on the couch and playing, or where you're trying to communicate with a lot of people online doing an MMO or something like that. So.
Well, I imagine you can do something walkie-talkie kind of thing.
Something.
It's just going to be a whole heap of people speaking at the same time.
That's a very different experience.
Yeah.
So if you have content developed for that experience that people like, that's one thing. But people will prefer what gives them the best experience given what they're looking for.
It's like playing horror games, they can play horror games in virtually.
Yeah, those things can be pretty scary. Yes?
Well, first of all, I think virtual reality really was designed for that sort of horror level immersion to heighten that experience. But
Sure.
I think where it really fails is in games where extreme precision is required.
Mm-hmm.
For example, and I've actually seen a few demos of Counter-Strike in virtual
Sure.
reality, it seems to contradict the very nature of the game, since it's designed to be a shooter that hides away some of the realism
Yes.
of a shooting game
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of a more mechanically reliable
Yes.
game, where you can get something right exactly each time.
Mhm.
I think that's why Counter-Strike is basically the most popular competitive shooter.
Sure.
And something like virtual reality wouldn't work for that.
It may not yet, but it could in the future as well, and it's really something
Yeah.
that you have to evaluate for yourself.
It depends on the design. It depends on the experience. It depends on the design intent as well. I mean, if the intent is to,
Also,
yeah.
what he was saying earlier about the level of immersion, having that layer between you is sometimes a good thing.
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, you can monitor, like, how much money do I have? Look at my mini-map, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
It'd be a different type of game that works really well on that platform anyway.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff could be done with Dragon Ball Z Scouters.
But I get what you mean though. It's like, I saw like a recent debate on YouTube, and is it Zelda with motion controls versus classic?
Mm.
The Zelda, it's much easier with using classic controls. I mean, I don't mind either, but most people would probably prefer the classic controls.
But I think that's because of what we're used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to drive a car, but we're used to the steering wheel.
Yep.
It's not actually super practical, but we all know how to do that now.
Uh-huh.
Pedals.
Yeah.
We could probably change it to a joystick and have a little,
Sorry, one moment.
controller in place of the steering wheel. That would work, but everyone would go, no, that.
Yeah.
Really keyboard.
Right. Question?
Just, sorry to go back to the theory a bit, you brought up
Sure.
Skinner and then positive psychology. And,
Yeah.
And in looking at some of and you mentioned psychologists working more in game
Yep,
companies and organisations. In looking at perhaps the limitations of positive psychology, even Al Gore can't solve global warming for can't it's there. There are the external, the elephant
Sure,
in the room
sure.
is the external environment. Are there any particular developments in the area of psychology that might inform, entertainment and fun and games, that are more breakthrough, if you like, than positive psychology? Which has been
In more breakthrough?
or perhaps
More recent
More
discovery.
recent besides
in
that? Okay.
psychological understanding that, that are threats for further research.
A lot of that stuff that would fall into the social identity and community stuff.
Right.
Because that's one of the areas where social psychology is really interested in, and where games being, with the whole shift to multiplayer and communities and online, is really really has more of a basis these days.
Yeah.
There's not as much investigation on the classical behaviorist approaches anymore because that stuff's been explored quite a bit.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, a lot of what may inform things is the focus on player experience, the look at how they interact with others, the look at how their roles, identity, preferences, and stuff inform how they enjoy a game and how they get engaged with the community.
What about other disciplines like sociology or economics?
Yeah, certainly. Like economics has been one of the things that has interested. Economists have been interested in games, especially like MMOs, for a very long time. Because where else? Well, yeah, because like Castronova, who I quoted, it won the Fathers of the Study of Virtual Worlds. He himself's an economist, because he was like, wait. So you mean I can track exactly what behaviors happen when I change something in the economy, as opposed to just trying to estimate? This is cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, they Valve and others do hire economists as well to balance that sort of thing. Sociology certainly, as well as, I mean, even some of the things about mythic, even some of the religion and other things about mythic thinking and such, about how we encapsulate people's thoughts, how we break down narratives, how we create these legends, these bits of lore that really draw people in. Compendiums for the world.
Any particular areas or authors that you can mention beyond the ones you have?
Beyond the ones I have, psychology, there's Seligman, of course. Antonovsky, I've mentioned. I'm sure you're aware. Oh, okay. Theater is one of the areas that I don't think I mentioned here, which I think can inform theater. Specifically, some of the drama theater stuff. Augusto Boal, Theater of the Oppressed. His work is really interesting, especially with relation to serious games, embodiment, reenactment.
Epistemology of, what's it called? So I suppose that's another direction. So.
Yeah, as well. There's, like I said, there's so much to be found in the overlaps, in the intersections that we're just not looking at. Yes?
That kind of sounded like, a question I was just about to ask, which is, some serious games that you put out there, that was just a list of serious games. I didn't quite...
That was not a list of serious games.
Well, not a list.
That was a list of philosophies that could affect game development.
Yes.
Economy drastically influences how World of Warcraft's money system is handled.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't quite.
No worries.
In that case, I will ask my question. What serious games would you point to and say, look, that's worked well, or I kind of accept it as being the gold level or up there in terms of serious games?
It depends on the audience that they're designed for. I mean, there are games like Remission, which are designed to help kids with cancer know why they need to take their chemotherapy and whatnot, which is really well targeted, really well designed for that age group. And then there are more general games like, say, This War of Mine, which really touches upon the experience of a civilian in wartime and how difficult it is to make correct moral choices when you're faced with needing to survive. And you don't have that power fantasy going for you as much. It makes a very interesting choice there. There's games like Never Alone, which do interesting things with encapsulating a Native American tradition within games, which I think would be I think games are a really interesting way to explore the worlds of thought and history and myth that are missed out on. I mean, things like Assassin's Creed, we're talking about how history is your playground, then focusing on pretty much exclusively European history with very well-known events. And where's the promise in that? That's not history is your playground anymore. That's just we're going to relive a couple of events and tweak a few things. When you have huge, expansive worlds that you could look at, or countries and myths you could look at, like China, India, Russia, is more than just side-scrolling phone games that they could do. In terms of other serious games, it's either the ones that are very well targeted for a specific little audience, or the more general ones that look at it and don't necessarily look at concepts that don't necessarily call themselves serious games. Like, for example, Journey, the guided meditation, This War of Mine, which doesn't call themselves a serious game, but they are effectively one. Never Alone and Nevermind, which explores the world of people with different mental disorders. So, yeah, I think a lot of the best serious games that are distributed to the public these days are the ones which are not branded as serious games, quite frankly.
Yeah. The aforementioned reason that, I gather they have more levity in how they approach it rather than having been dictated. Is that?
Well, to some extent, there's also some stigma associated with the term. Because when people hear serious game, a lot of the time they think, oh, this must not be fun. Or I want a fun game, not something that's serious. I want something entertaining. And so because of that, and part of that is because the Serious Games Initiative way back in 2002 wanted to differentiate themselves from entertainment games because of the whole games and violence stuff that was going on at the time. So they were like, government's not going to fund us if they think our games cause violence. So we're serious games, guys. We're different. It's biting them in the ass now, to an extent. Yes?
The trick is to teach people without them realizing they're being taught.
Yes, exactly.
Which is the other reason why serious games wouldn't want to sell themselves as serious games.
Exactly.
Is there a good resource that you could point to in terms of developing serious games, like an online community that you'd refer to?
There are a couple of groups like the Serious Games Association right now. And
sorry, I might just jump in here. I am the program coordinator of the Serious Games Bachelor up at USC.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Or, of course, the University of Sunshine Coast, I'm sure, yeah.
not South Carolina. They have a distinctly different games degree.
Or Southern California, which is where I'm an alumnus of.
Southern California. I always say South Carolina, but I mean Southern California, sorry.
Yes.
All the same thing.
My American colleague rips into me every time I say it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Don't worry, she's the other program coordinator, so.
Yeah.
Right, well, yeah, he's a resource there. And yeah, you can always contact the SIG as well, and we can connect you with other resources as well, so yeah. Yes?
Have there ever been like any games that have ever broken away from the formula and still been successful?
Minecraft.
Oh yeah.
There are lots of games that break away and no one knows why they're successful. I mean, look at those stupid, what's the clicker heroes? I mean, it's not a massive phenomenon, but there's no end game. You can't lose. You can't win. You can't die. You can't take damage. It's just there. And there it is, and people play it.
It's meeting certain needs, but it might not balance them. It's meeting certain needs, but it might not balance them. It gives players a sense of progression and allows them to accomplish something with an investment of time, and it doesn't really require much of them. So it's something that they can easily do when they want to pass time.
Right. But
So it turns their time into enjoyment and entertainment.
But it does buck the system of actually having an endpoint or a
It still facilitates the
high
player
score.
needs.
It still facilitates the need. I mean, even something like Clow Clicker, that whole parody could, yeah.
Just like how we were talking about before, where community was balancing out other needs. You might have this game which is something that the person needs for themselves, and they already have everything else balanced in their life, and they just want this to fill in the gaps.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's such a subset of what ordinarily would go into a game, like Minecraft, that initially didn't have any quests, didn't have any non-player characters, it was just plonked and a control system to build stuff and off you go.
The open world stuff works as well. I mean, people have played things like Second Life and stuff in the past. So.
As another viewpoint, most games would have started originally somewhere, if you go far enough back, most styles of games would be a new kind of genre.
Yeah.
That's right.
We mentioned Pokemon earlier, which was, when it first came out, a pretty novel change to how things are done. I can't think of just not what was originally pointed out, but I can't think of too many other games where you aren't the one fighting from around that time. I think Monster Rancher might be the only other one I can think of, but it wasn't exactly a common thing.
Yeah.
I'd say as far as games breaking the mold and going off in a new direction, I'd say Half-Life does that really well. Like it went for a whole new way of storytelling.
Yep.
By just giving you a blank slate first person story happen to you rather than you reading the story.
Yes.
Or having it told some other way.
may I also suggest Game Online?
Yeah?
That game, I've only started, like, a friend managed to hook me into it last year, but it puts me in a very similar mindset back when I started Counter-Strike, because it was quite a paradigm shift for somebody who was used to deathmatch, and it wasn't something that everybody could make peace with.
Yeah.
But that was part of why it was fun. But now everybody's playing CS, and now I find Eve.
Yeah. What do you do? So what do you do in Eve?
Me?
Yeah. What do you prefer?
I have a Ninja Cloaky Explorer ship
Oh, cool.
and a big cruiser that basically protects it while it's in one host.
Cool. Cool.
So 2 characters. Yes, I'm already in.
I see. Okay.
The other point of note with your question, when you go for a novel game and hope it sells well, that's kind of a giant risk. When you sell the same game with a few features tweaked, that's not as risky.
Yeah. Especially when you're spending many, many millions on a game, investing like a year or 2 of development time, that's a lot of money.
Basically like the movie industry.
Yeah.
They have the formulas now. They're spending the hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, sometimes more than a lot of them.
Like occasionally you'll see a new IP or a new revolution or anything, but it's not as nearly as common as like remakes or say the sports games that come out every year. They're just like annual iterations.
Nintendo does deviate from the formula a bit more, and you know, they were the ones who started the Wiimote thing, and then PlayStation and Xbox had their versions. Kinect is one of them, and I can't remember the other one right now, and they didn't sell that well. But the Wii didn't sell, like, the concept behind the Wii didn't sell that well either, and I don't know why they bothered.
Well, it's good because Nintendo's always trying different things.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, there was this other, I asked that question because I was thinking about this other game, but I'm not sure if it broke away from the formula, but it was different. And it was basically a game called Ghost Story, I think on Steam.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And basically you're watching all these different videos of like, so you're pretty much playing a detective, finding out
What happened in that situation, yeah.
This woman, like, you see all these different recordings of her interviews and parts of it, and you're sort of piecing it together and trying to figure out what really happened. And it was interesting because it was so different. I've never played a game where you're just watching different videos, but I liked it because you get in the sense of the story.
Yep.
Yeah. But,
You played the Walking Dead games?
oh, I don't think I have.
I was rather impressed. I know there's an ongoing debate whether they constitute real games or not, but I'll leave that to my betters. I just wanted to mention that it's the only game that I can think of that actually makes me take NPC interactions seriously as I would with a real person. I mean, I'm not just looking at a laundry list of potential responses. Also have to consider how are they going to respond to this, and there's a time limit, and anytime you're talking with anybody, you're thinking on your feet, and I can't think of anything that does that.
You're talking about the Telltale games? Telltale games Walking Dead?
Yeah.
I mean, when they work, they really work, but when they don't,
Yeah.
But they managed to take a very old formula, like the old missed point-and-click adventure games, and brought it several generations forward.
They've done it quite well, in
It's worth
fact,
it
yeah.
for that whole novelty aspect.
All right, anything else? Oh, all right, then I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.